Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another MIDF Conversation, where we host a lunchtime conversation between MIDF and captains of industry and thought leaders. This is a keto lunch for the intellect. No carbs, no starch, just the good stuff, pure protein and some greens as food for thought. I would like to welcome all our participants, the entrepreneurs, CEOs, fund managers, and finance and business professionals, the individual investors investing their own hard-earned money, members of the media, students, especially those studying macroeconomics, colleagues, and everyone. I'm delighted to have with us today Nik Amlizan Mohamed, the CEO of Kumpulan Wang Persaraan Diperbadankan, or KWAP. Welcome to MIDF Conversations, Nik, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Sharon.
It's a pleasure to have you. Nik, you are now the CEO of KWAP, who's been for what, 2 years? Congratulations. And before that, you were the CEO of LTAT. Perhaps you can just start, Nik, by just telling us a little bit about how you became still the only woman in charge of a GLIC. Not that I want to bring gender into it, but it's great. And in fact, in charge of 2 GLICs, and no one else has come since you. So tell us a little bit about what your journey to becoming a fund manager.
Thank you, Dr. Sharon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good afternoon to everyone here. Dr. Sharon and the team at MIDF, thank you so much for having me here today. It is indeed a pleasure to be on MIDF Conversation and to share with all of you here about KWAP, about what we have been up to, as well as where we are heading into the future. Just a little bit about myself. My journey in the fund management industry started when I first came back from the United States, and I worked there for 2 years, but not in fund management industry. So when I came back, I decided to basically started afresh, took a pay cut, started afresh, and started with BBMB Unit Trust. And then I moved to ASEAN Bankers, which is the investment bank of Maybank. At that point of time, it was called ASEAN Bankers, where I joined as assistant manager. I think I left as the senior portfolio manager and head of investment research. Actually, set up the investment research there. And after that, I went and joined RHB Asset Management. And I joined KWAP at that point of time. The first CEO of KWAP, Dato' Azan, called me up and asked me to help set up the equity department. And nonetheless, I mean, the journey at KWAP has been very interesting. It is the longest organization that I've been attached to. I joined during the initial years as one of the pioneer team members, 2007. And I only left because I was asked to assist at LTAT, so introduce the restructuring there to set up LTAT as a pension fund with a proper pension fund kind of structure. And then after 2 years there, I've been offered and asked to help again to come back at KWAP and to become the CEO of KWAP. Yes.
Wow, wow. So you are well. You certainly know the job and have experiences there.
Yeah. And having fun doing it. That's
great. I mean, can you tell us a bit about KWAP? Because we know what EPF does, because EPF, people contribute money to EPF, and when they retire, whether it's at 55 or 60 or whatever it is, they take the money out and they try and make what little money they have in EPF last until they die, really. Is KWAP the same as EPF except for civil servants, or is it something else? Is it different?
Yeah, KWAP is actually a defined benefit scheme. Yeah? Defined benefit, that means that the retirement benefits, the pension amount and so forth is predefined at the beginning of their career, right? Upon their retirement, this is a specific amount that they will get based on their last drawn salary. So obviously for EPF, it's different because it's defined contribution is based on the amount that you contribute into the fund. So for us, as far as we're concerned, our mandate is very clear. It is to generate optimized return, is quite standard, right, on investment, which is in line with our long-term objective. Our main objective is to grow the fund size sustainably. And on top of that, in 2016, we took over the pension payment function from JPA. So right now, we also seek to enrich the retirement experience of our pensioners which is actually a crucial part of our function. So coming back to the reason of our being, essentially why we're here is to assist the government to pay the pension bill. And why I say assist, currently the pension payment is still by the government, okay? But we will assist if the government requests for us to assist, and which we have done so the last few years as well. So we are very pleased that we have been able to basically fulfill our main objective of the setup of KWAP. And a little bit about KWAP, Dr. Sharon, because I realized this. People sometimes don't realize that KWAP is actually a very young organization. We are only 15 years old,
Right.
you know, so we were only set up in 2007. So I think as far as we're concerned, the business model that we have was the one that was designed back in 2008. So since then, we never had the overall comprehensive review of our business model. Yeah. So what happened was in 2018, we discovered that there were quite a few things that we need to review because we were becoming larger than just a single organization. We have a group of companies, we have operating subsidiaries and so forth. So that's why we decided, when I came back as a CEO, we decided that we needed to do Trust 5 lah, which we launched in August. So basically Trust 5 would ensure that we will become a lot more sustainable going forward.
Yeah, so you said when you assist the government, so the government still pays your pensions out of Consolidated Fund, right? So because many other countries, they don't have a KWAP equivalent. The government just pays the pension.
Correct. So KWAP was actually originally KWAP was set up under the Accountant General's office. So there was that KWAP fund. In fact, when I was in the private sector, I was one of the managers, fund managers managing, as a senior fund manager, right? But under the vision of the CEO then, Dr. Azian, we decided KWAP was actually basically corporatized lah, so that the team members of KWAP, for example, we contribute to EPF. We're not under pension scheme of government. That's one. Number two, we actually pay our own expenses. So we need to make money in order to basically operate, right? That includes the payment of pension and so forth, so that we become independent and we're not reliant upon government's grants or funding and so forth.
But the moment the government doesn't call on you to pay all the pensions, right? The government pays most of the pensions itself, and once in a while it comes to KWAP.
Correct. So it's actually, if you look at the budget, government's budget, budget announcement and so forth, you will see there's part of the contribution from KWAP that will be stated there. For example, 2020 it was about 5 billion. Yeah. So it will be in the budget announcement. Right.
So KWAP will never be able to cover the entire pension liabilities of the government. I mean,
at the point of the setup, back into 1991, for example, when KWAP first received the contribution amount of 500 million, at that point of time, the pension bill was already 4 billion ringgit per annum.
Per annum, I see.
Yes. So that's why the setup of KWAP is outside the government side, government basically scheme and all that, so that we can grow the fund as fast as possible, but of course within the risk parameters that our board decides upon. So that is the whole intention, and that's why I think at that point of time as well, we decided to have that blend between the public as well as the private sector, specific expertise and skill sets, right, to come in and to grow the fund. Now, coming back to our how we grow the fund is of course via our strategic asset allocation. Nothing new there, but obviously over the last few years it has evolved, right? Being this public market centric towards the private market. Why towards the private market, right? Right now our private market only accounts for about 10%. So our intention is to grow it to 20%. What we discovered is that from risk-adjusted return, just to share with the audience, KWAP has exposure to all sorts of asset classes, like listed equity, fixed income, private equity, real estate, as well as infrastructure and money market, of course. So from the private market perspective, what we find is that currently public market, what used to be, for example, fixed income, securities is no longer fixed income, right? Because of the rising interest rate environment. We are no longer in a low interest rate environment, right? So, and with that comes that volatility that is quite significant of late. For the private market space, from risk-adjusted return, what we see is that it's a lot more, from risk-adjusted return perspective, is higher compared to the public market space currently. So for us, that's why we need to build the skill sets to ensure that when we go into the private market, because the information are not public information, right? So we need to make sure that we have in-depth skills and proper capabilities to go deeper into each investments, look at the cash flow, look at their projections, look at the business model to ensure that we can grow the company larger.
Okay. Now I think we'll go into this huge subject of asset allocation a bit later as well, because I think what I discovered talking to all the fund managers, that's the biggest decision you can make, right? The asset allocation, and then
85%, right? 85% of performance actually come from your asset base. Right?
Yeah, so not picking the right stock so much as making sure how much you put in stock. Okay, but before that, just going back to this idea of what KWAP does. So do you get money every year from the government?
We do get contribution from the federal government as well as from the agencies, statutory bodies and so forth. So government is about, I think from the agency's perspective, it's 17.5% of the emolument, as well as from government perspective, federal is about 5%.
I see. So 5% of what they pay out, but that's not very high, because for EPF, you got to contribute 10-20% of total salaries go to EPF, right? Government only gives 5%, so that's not going to be enough to cover the pension liabilities in the future. Right?
So for us, it's actually quite crucial for us to look at the whole pension ecosystem. Eventually, right? We need to kind of look at it, but of course, there is no single pill that can resolve all issues. I think countries all over the world, they all have their own issues at hand and so forth. So ability for us to set aside some amount to pay the pension liabilities is quite crucial. So I think for KWAP, that's why we actually set up Trust 5. It is to elevate one of our core functions, which is the retirement services, to be at a higher level, to be a lot more strategic, as well as to eventually become a thought leader in the whole pension ecosystem, at least in Malaysia. I think there was a recent study that was done, if I'm not mistaken, was it Mercer and CFA? They came up with this study, and what they found was, I think only 3 countries that achieved A score as far as the pension system is concerned. Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway, if I'm not mistaken. So Malaysia achieved, I think, C+. So I think there's still a lot of work that we can do there. We're talking about the whole pension ecosystem.
Which is
obviously. So I think we have to look at them and study what they do good, what they actually they have in place, the ones that we can emulate. There are so many levels. When you look at the whole pension ecosystem, there's so many levels that you can pull. So in order for us to be able to provide true and appropriate services to our pensioners, I think we have to look at the overall ecosystem well. And that's exactly what we intend to do.
Wow, that's a big subject. And maybe we should talk about the whole pension crisis. Well, no, I don't think crisis is too strong a word. The pension crisis, which the looming pension crisis, is going to hit us.
I think it's the whole subject on its own, right, Dato'?
Yeah, it is. We'll talk a little bit about it. But so tell me a little about the Trust 5. You got presumably they're 5, right?
Yes. So coming back to Trust 5, it is a 3-year program. So it is up to 2025. So basically, we want to elevate 5 enablers, right? Structure, governance, of course. We cannot do away without governance. People, processes, as well as digital. So digital will be a primary thrust for KWAP. And I think we have made this known before that we aim to be a digital native organization. I think it is actually quite ambitious, but I think for right now, we cannot afford to keep importing talents, right? We need to make sure that our own talents internally to be able to basically be invested in digital. I think there's no way that we can embrace the future without having that digital to be one of the key aspects of the organization. It is the backbone of the organization, right? So we must nurture citizen developers, so to speak, within KWAP itself. So we hope one day that our talents will be fully well-rounded in a sense, right? So to treat digital, because sometimes we think digital is IT's role. I think moving forward, it will not be the case anymore. It's actually, we have to resolve issues on our own, right? And to be able to use different systems in order for us to basically provide the best services, the best offerings to our pensioners in particular. And also, I think we cannot do away without having digital aspect in our, of course, fund management industry as well. So we have,
I mean, it's, will algorithm replace all of us?
yeah, but I think for us to basically handle or to basically take care of our pensioners, we have to have the human aspect, because machines do not have hearts. We all do, right? We all have compassion and all that, and empathy. So I think human aspect will never go away. It's not, yeah.
Oh, so when you say digital, it's not just within the internal organization, also the way in which you interact with the government pensioners, it will also be.
Yes. So right now, for example, we have My Persaraan app, right? We have, I think the download so far is about 200,000. So we intend to basically make sure that, at least for the pensioners, it's quite easy for them to interact with us, right? It's actually, who doesn't have a handphone, right? So their ability to ask questions, because generally 90% of the questions is about the same issues, quite administrative. So they need not come all the way to our Sabajaya office to ask questions, to find out about the pension issues. And we also intend to have, to make it a lot easier for them to basically fill out forms and all that, right? So we need not have, for example, for them to come up with their own hard copy documents and all that. So those would be some of the aspects that we intend to have. And I think one more important consideration when it comes to our ability to have greater reach to our pensioners all over Malaysia would be that knowledge sharing aspect, right? Because, for example, on our Instagram, for example, you will see quite a number of that kind of knowledge sharing or on financial literacy, on their readiness for retirement, on perhaps also warnings on the cybersecurity aspect, right?
Yes.
And not to fall for any scams, particularly when upon the day of their retirement, because they will get this kind of amount of gratuity or whatever not, So we have to make sure that their savings is well basically protected for them to last for another 20 years post-retirement.
How many pensioners are there actually? How many customers do you have? I mean, in terms of pensioners?
700,000.
Wow.
So that would include both the direct beneficiaries as well as indirect, meaning that their children or their spouses and all that. So it's
so when a pensioner dies, his spouse receives a pension, or the children receive a pension?
Spouse and children. But the spouse, of course, they have to marry the spouse before they retire.
This sounds like it's been an issue.
No, it's not an issue at all. Just a gentle reminder.
A gentle reminder to, well, I'm not sure to who actually, but it is a reminder about that. That's a lot of people to deal with, and I guess at the moment you deal with them through the offices, right? In the old-fashioned way, they come to the office. How many offices do you have? How many branches does KWAP have? One in each state, more than that?
Well, we have one. The main headquarters will be in Integra, right, in KL, and the other one is in Sabajaya. But we also open a small window, for example, in some of the JPA offices.
Oh, okay.
So I think for our pensioners, they can go to any of the JPA offices and reach us from that. But but actually we get phone calls, for example, in thousands a day. To answer simple questions, to assist them, and any issues that are a bit more complicated, then we escalate up. But generally, it can be answered via a phone call or now through My Persaraan app. So that is the intention of My Persaraan app, so that they don't need to basically incur charges in order for them to ask. Yeah.
My Persaraan app. Okay, not relevant to me, but I will.
Public can download My Persaraan app. Anyone can download My Persaraan app, no issue. But of course, for the pensioners, so if they download, for example, we do offer some value-added services, opportunity for them to perhaps, for example, as simple as buy things at discounted prices, of course, that will not be available for the public. We use those things for the pensioners.
All right. Okay. Gosh. Okay. We'll have to. Let's see if we have time to talk a bit more about the whole pension market. I mean, there's just 700,000 government pensioners alone. The number of people out there that's a lot. That's a big market.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. We've got questions on the Q&A box, and I'll invite everybody to just put some more questions in. But before we go to those questions, maybe just go back again to talk about, the assets under AUM, and your asset allocation. So what is your AUM currently?
As of the end of last year, it's about 159. 159.
That's billion ringgit, right?
Million ringgit. That is a net amount. A net amount means that it's after the withdrawals and so forth. Yeah. If it's gross, it's about 170 something. Okay, that's one. And secondly, I think just to share, at the beginning of the inception of KWAP, it was about 41 billion. So we have grown about quadruple the size.
Wow.
Yeah, as well as the market that we are in and so forth. And also asset classes perspective. So we have grown quite a bit.
So 170 billion ringgit, which you have to manage. And what kind of returns do you have to pay? You don't have to pay a dividend out, right? Do you have to pay a dividend out?
We don't. The only amount that we pay is basically the withdrawal by government on a yearly basis. Yeah. So depending on the requirement of government. But under KWAP Akta, Retirement Fund Act of KWAP, the one that governs KWAP, it is quite clear that KWAP fund can only be used for pension-related expenses. That's it. It cannot be used for anything else. So even if it goes to go up to the government, it must be used solely 100% for pension obligations. That's it.
Right. And what is the government? Do you know what the government payout every year is in terms of pensions? It must be quite a large chunk of OE, isn't it? Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, 2022 in the budget, it was approximately 28, but that is inclusive of the soldiers' pension bill as well.
Inclusive of the
soldiers.
Soldiers, I see. So
the soldiers is being taken care of by LTAT and Jabatan Hal Ehwal veteran.
Right.
Yeah.
But still 28 billion, even if I don't know, 3/4 of that must be for civil servants, right? Out of 28 billion. Yeah.
I think 24 billion, if I'm not mistaken, is for the civil servants. If I get it.
Clearly, your AUM is not enough is nowhere near enough to cover.
I think the funding ratio would eventually, that's why for us, it's quite crucial for us to grow the fund size. Back to what I mentioned earlier, our main reason why we exist is actually to make sure that eventually we can actually continue to assist the government sustainably. Because we have started to assist the government, right? So we just need to make sure that we are able to do so sustainably into the future. Yeah,
but just to generate 5%, that's 20 times that, right? So you got to have 400 billion in AUM just to,
Exactly. So our SAE is built to provide 6% per annum, but over a longer period, over 10-year period, 6% per annum on average. There will be some, volatility, ups and downs of that kind of performance return, but over time, it should be about 6%. But having said that, Dr. Sharon, we are at the cusp of perhaps some quite significant changes as far as the capital market assumptions are concerned, right? So the easy years of low interest rate environment is no longer there. Okay, we are looking at heightened interest rate environment due to heightened inflationary pressures that are quite sticky, you know, that will not just go away, you know, just after a few months, it will just go away. It's just a blip. So we are currently actually reviewing our SAA and building in the new capital market assumptions into the SAA, and to ensure that our ability, once the market recovers or when the economy recovers and so forth, we'll be able to take into consideration or not take into consideration, but we'll be able to basically take advantage, take the opportunity of the recovery later. I think perhaps going back to private market, I'm not quite sure whether how well aware of investors about the private space, right? Because it's actually still quite nascent. For example, in Malaysia, for example, right, ability of retailers to go into private market may not still be quite obvious in terms of the routes to get there. What we see is that if you look at the returns perspective, compared to returns of the equity market, for example, domestic, right? We are looking at still double digit return from private market perspective compared to single digit for the public market. Perhaps now is also the right time for us to take basically into consideration that factor, as well as building the capabilities. This is super important, because what I have found is that it's quite difficult to find experienced skill sets out there. So for KWAP, we are big in our talent development, and we have to build internally. The skill sets we must build internally, because we cannot simply import, because there is very scarce the talent resource, the right talent resources is quite scarce in the market.
Yeah, I mean, finding people with private equity experience is hard. It's hard. There aren't many in Malaysia to begin with, and you're right, and the competition for them is quite high. So at the moment, you're saying you got what, 90% in public markets and 10% in private, and that's not just private equity, right? They include buildings and infrastructure and private markets as a whole. So yeah, and you're going to reduce by 10% in public and increase by 10% in private. So are you going to see a big sell down by KWAP in terms of selling down all your shareholdings in Malaysian companies?
I knew that question would be you know, the fund size will grow, right? The fund size will grow. And when we say that we want to grow the private market space, it's not at the expense of public market. You know, the private market space will grow faster, I would put it that way, than perhaps in terms of exposure, but the exposure will be increasing nevertheless. So,
and that's what, because through the government contributions that come in, or through profits you make?
And so forth. Contribution, income that we make, and so forth. So the allocation towards the private market space will continue to be there. And number two, I think this is also quite significant as well, that when we look at the basically allocation, right, into the private market, it's not readily available. Okay? It's more like opportunities when they are available. We will go out and seek for it, but only when they are available, then only we invest, and they must meet our requirements. Because, for example, for public market, I can go in today, I can get out tomorrow, and I can go back in again the same day.
Right. Yeah.
It's very liquid. It's very liquid for public market. For private market, it's very illiquid. So when we go in, we must be able to basically be in it, be invested in it for at least 5 years, right? For at least 5 years. So it's a lot longer compared to public market. So I think whilst it's easy for us to say, oh, because that amount will increase to 20% and this one will reduce by 10%, it doesn't work that way. I think we must get the liquidity perspective and so forth. We have that long-term kind of target that we want to achieve. So we will get there. But in the meantime, how do we get there too? It will be this journey of balancing the two markets well. And I think our ability to ensure that the right partner is selected, I think that is quite key, because if we get it wrong, that will be very costly and it will bind us for the next at least.
That's right. Yeah.
Exit strategy must be redefined at the early stage of our investment. But of course, being in the private market, that they will not be exposed to the volatility that we are currently facing, right? Global market dropped by what?
Yeah, but there are big questions about that. All the public markets have had to take huge write downs and reduce the things. But on the private side, they haven't been marking down their investments as much. So perhaps they're just not being realistic about how much they should mark down the assets.
I think we have to differentiate between because stock market is basically the index level and so forth, the price and all. It depends on sometimes it's not reflective of the real business. It's more like the valuation play rather than the cash flow or the growth underlying the businesses. So KWAP, we are a pension fund. We are long-term patient capital. We're in it for the long term. When we invest, we want partners that we can invest in the long term, right? So for us, when we look at it, we must look at the businesses that we're in. Particularly when market consolidates, it must be the businesses that we must be invested in, not the share price that goes up and down. Right? So that we buy, okay, with this company, can this company, for example, their debt level, can it for example, service its debt over the next, say, 5 years when interest rate is rising? For example, how many percent is floating rate? How many percent is fixed rate? Will the revenue grow in light of the recent, economic slowdown and so forth, right? How will they capitalize on the opportunities that will represent itself? Perhaps some companies will have that war chest that can do their M&A and so forth, right? That will benefit all parties, including the investment bankers, right, Dato'?
Oh, of course.
So I think we have to be mindful of that. So for us, particularly when we look at the private equity side, like for example, I think one of our invested companies, when we invested, they were number 7 in the world, rated number 7 ranking, number 7 in the world. They're at number 1.
Wow.
Yes, globally. We're talking about global market. Another entity, a company that we are invested in, they were at number 12. Now they're at number 6. So for us, we want companies who want to grow globally, who want to grow regionally, who want to become champions in their field, in their specific industry. So we want to be that capital partner for them. Obviously, we are not there to run their businesses, but we are there to basically assist them to get there.
Right. But those kind of good companies, they're available in public markets as well. Some really good companies have had their share prices taken a beating for no good reason, right? So maybe there are opportunities there too to be a patient.
Oh, definitely. Do you know that, for example, KLCI, the market, our index is used to be like holding at 17 times PE, like for number of years, prolonged number of years. Now they're like what, 13, 12 times PE? So there are a lot of, and within that kind of valuation, there are even cheaper companies there as well. And I think we like the ones who pay high dividend, obviously. We like companies who have strong cash flow, obviously, and quite have kind of that business strategy is something that we can actually understand, and we can see where their progress is at. But more importantly, Dato' Sharon, I think one subject matter that perhaps I've not raised so far, which is very, very close to KWAP, it is in our heart, ESG.
ESG.
So the companies who are looking at ESG, who are embracing, to help and make the world a better place, so to speak, and move to become exemplary leaders or champions as far as ESG matters are concerned within their industry, we will also be invested in them as well.
That's interesting. Well, I'm certainly come and talk to you privately after this to show you some companies we know. But and going back, so you mentioned Malaysian companies and KLCI. So you do invest in Malaysia because you're not going to move all your money overseas.
Well, the fact that I think people always say, okay, when KWAP is like 20% invested abroad. We always forget 80%. That is a bulk of our investments are still in domestic market.
Right.
Come rain, come shine. Our performance, because 20% rule, whatever it is, our performance is highly, highly dependent on how well our markets do. And we will continue to stay invested with our partners, in their journey, trying to expand. Of course, my preference is regionally or globally. Yeah, there's some really, really good companies. I know that we actually have quite, with some of them, we have quite frequent conversations as well.
Okay, right. So 20% overall of KWAP will be invested overseas and 80% in Malaysia. So that includes the private and public markets, so 20%.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on fixed income? I mean, I know that, as a pension, as a pension fund, you have to have a big fixed income portfolio. What are your thoughts on fixed income at the moment?
Yeah.
Given the mayhem in the markets.
Bulk of our fixed income is domestic, obviously, right? And we are, I think, based on the latest rating agency's view on Malaysia, it is at stable, right? And I think sometimes, when you look at the volatility in terms of pricing, you're assuming that you want to just trade, right? But if you hold until maturity, you will get the return, the yield that you bought it at. So I think for us, it's actually, we are very confident in our, both the government papers as well as the corporate papers, which we are watching very closely as well. And we are dealing with basically any issues, looking at their cash flows and all that for any possible ECL that we have to do, for example, right? We are monitoring that very, very closely. We always mark to market both the fixed income as well as the equity side. That will be reflected in our performance numbers. Okay.
So with rising rates, I'm sure you've had some mark-to-market losses on your fixed income book, but that's just
it's temporary, right? It's temporary. We must look at it from that long-term perspective again, because if we look at short-term, we may lose focus. We will miss the forest, right, for the trees. We are long-term, so we must make sure that our ability to withstand the short-term volatility is there. In fact, we must embrace volatilities because we are in the business of taking risk, right? It's just a matter of how much risk can you take. Any investments that we do will involve risk. So I think there is no such thing as risk-free. I mean, if someone says that, then
it's a scam. It's a scammer.
That is the biggest risk of the lot, right?
Yeah.
So I think you just have to be quite mindful, embrace the risk. So our team members must be, our talents and all that must be basically developed to make sure that they don't view risk as the enemy. In fact, they must embrace and take opportunities. But in order for you to do that, you really have to know what you are invested in. You really have to know the business well.
That is true. Let's just go quickly to, not quickly, we go some of the questions from the audience. So, so the first one here is from Faiz Wahab. Most analysts are expecting a downturn in 2023. What's your strategy in terms of portfolio allocation?
Yes, I think coming back, I think I did mention that a bit earlier. We don't look at 2023 as per the year perspective. It's just one of the many, many years that we're going to continue to stay invested in. I think that's why I mentioned just now as well, from our SAA, strategic asset allocation modeling perspective, we are actually revisiting our capital market assumptions. We have to adjust. Maybe to show it information, back in 1990s, when I first started in this industry, the expected return for KLCI was 15% per annum.
Wow.
15.
Those were the days.
Those were the days, exactly. So now, over the years, we have adjusted it down, right, to 8%, 7%, and so forth. So I think we will continue to do that, And I think another aspect, perhaps, Datuk Sharon, I think we both survived the 1998 Asian financial crisis.
Yeah.
Remember at that time, the market dropped from about 1,600 in 1996 all the way down to below 300 in 1998, 2 years, okay? And yet here we are today at 1380. I know it seems bleak, but it's still a lot higher than where we were.
That's one. Right.
Number two, and this 1380 was actually after we hit the peak of almost 1900 in 2018. That was 4 years ago, right? So I think we have to look at it in perspective. What do we do when market takes a downturn, right? So we must be ready to capitalize on it, because that's when everyone is so scared. Actually, that is amongst the best time for us to look at, perhaps risk-adjusted return will be at the higher levels.
That's good. So very Warren Buffett, kind of like, be greedy when others are fearful. That's always go on. Next one is 700,000 pensioner clients. Do you monetize the data? Do you have any plans to monetize this data?
I don't think we are in the business of monetizing data of our pensioners. We are in the business of offering them value-added services. They are our members. So no, I think the data does not belong to KWAP, so to speak. Data belongs to the government, to JPA. I think that question perhaps better direct.
Okay, we'll go to.
So for us, we use the data as basically as data points for us to provide services to our pensioners, our members.
Okay, thank you. Daniel Koo asked, what are the best practices of KWAP which you want to, what best practices of Switzerland does KWAP want to emulate, or other countries like Switzerland?
I think we have to be quite mindful the stage of the basically economy, I would say, because we are coming from developing stage to moving towards the developed side, right? They have been developed for a lot longer than we have been. And of course, if I look at the Nordic countries, I wouldn't say specifically Switzerland, perhaps the Nordic countries in general, will be their move towards, for example, ESG factors.
Yes.
I see a lot more of their citizens riding bicycle to go to work, to go to school, instead of riding a van, riding a car, they take a lot more public transportation. So I do wish that we will have better public transportation in the future. That will be very much a wish. I think that would contribute greatly towards reducing their GHG emission. I think amongst a lot that will be quite high in terms of the ranking. And perhaps number two, perhaps another part of it is the savings part. I think, we have to save for the future. I think, but this would actually be a whole of society kind of approach, not just dependent on the basically policymaker side, but also individually, we ourselves. I think each of us have to play the role and make a difference where possible within the community that we operate in.
Okay. On this ESG point, will you be selling down carbon intensive assets and only investing in carbon neutral or carbon low carbon assets?
Yeah, that's all. If we just invest in green investments, we're looking at just 8% of what's available out there. And if we're serious about becoming a net zero, or neutral kind of carbon kind of society, or in portfolio for that matter in the future, you can't just be invested in this 8%, right? You must be looking at this 92% in order for us to elevate them to become green, right? And in the transition from brown businesses to green businesses, we can't kill them, because is that what we're trying to do by not providing them the lifeline for them to make that transition? So I'm actually a strong proponent, we at KWAP, a strong proponent for just transition. So we have to basically make sure that as long as they have a plan, they have their journey, depending on the industry. In each industry, we have their own kind of preferred journey, so to speak. You know, I'm glad that the Banagar has come up with that taxonomy, kan?
Yeah, JC's, yeah.
Right. And I'm sure you are too, right? Looking at
We're all looking at it, but you know, it's hard because I mean, but the country as a whole hasn't quite figured this out. For example, our industrial policy, our domestic trade policy, all that's got to gel and come together, which it doesn't yet.
Yeah, but it needs a whole society approach. The fact that we're talking about it compared to like completely not talking about it or not doing anything about it. Actions do matter. I think that's one thing. I think whilst we can say, okay, we want to do this and all that, but it must be followed through with actions, real actions. You know, how are you doing this, right? When we talk to our investing companies and we have shareholders engagement with them quite often, so we ask them, so what are you doing, right? So I think we must also be aware of this greenwashing. People say, okay, beautiful writing, but what are you actually doing, right? Is it really impactful? So we need to look at that kind of journey. So it's not enough to just look at green or be invested in green businesses, so to speak, or ESG compliant businesses just yet. But in the future, we will be. Just not now. Is this not time just yet?
No, I mean, someone showed me a list of all the top performing stocks in America since the beginning of the year, and number one is Occidental Petroleum, just more than double, right? So there is a case to be made that, you know, forget all this, just invest in carbon, because the more carbon intensive, the more financial returns there are.
Yeah, but at the same time, it will stop one day. I mean, if you're serious, if we know that the net zero is coming, it will stop one day if they're not ready to transition. Right? Once a lot more investment opportunities be offered, you know, for investment community to look at, I think more people will go to that direction. I think if you look at the institutions globally, it is on our main agenda. It's already in the main agenda item as far as the board matters are concerned, right? So it will get there. So if sure, I mean, if you look at the short term, yeah, because there are no, I guess they're still doing well because there are no options otherwise. Right. But once there are options, I think market will look at it differently.
Okay, that's great. Okay, we've got one more, because there's some time. Siti Masliza says, with the current market and economic conditions, how do you foresee the effects on the immediate return to the pensioners? I think have you answered that? I think you have more or less on the current conditions. Wan Satria, who's a colleague, says, whom you know well as well. Okay, first question is about the volatile market environment and how you manage this and mitigate. Second is does the government guarantee KWAP? But I guess it does, doesn't it? Because the government owns KWAP anyway. So
yeah, I think because the pension obligation is still with government.
Right.
Correct. So I think it's not for KWAP to guarantee, it's actually government. And it is an institution that they will pay the pension, right? So
there's been a lot of publicity about what happened to the UK pension funds when they took the wrong bet on gilts. Is that something we should worry about? Is KWAP involved in that kind of liability? I can't remember what it's called now. Liability something or another.
Yeah. I think that is one of the institutions we have to look at is quite closely, simply because, you know, you can't pay dividend typically as far as accounting standards are concerned. You can't pay dividend if your liability is above your assets, right? So I think for KWAP it's not something that will affect us directly because we don't have liability, so to speak, except for the liability that the government wishes for us to contribute on a yearly basis, which is right now about 5 billion per annum.
No, it's remarkable what's happening in the UK. I mean, the mismanagement of the economy is incredible.
Yeah. The Chancellor now is out of a job, right? After 1 month, nearly 1 month. So now, but I think that kind of, this is the part. I think for us, that kind of volatility, that type of changes, rapid changes that are taking place globally will continue to be there over the next few years. So for a KWAP, I think we have to make sure that our ability to be agile, to be dynamic, our SAA, our talents, and our organization as well must be built on these strong pillars, strong foundation, which is exactly why we did the Trust 5, in order for us to be able to go through the challenging times, so to speak, that we are facing currently as well as in the future. I think we cannot just simply say that, okay, we will sit still and do nothing while the world is changing, right? The world is changing with or without us, and it's changing rapidly. We have to recognize this. So we must always be aware that the impact of the what's happening globally will come on shore. Do you know, Dr. Sharon, back in early 2000 and so forth, before China, at that time, I think the beginning of China going into WTO, right? If one country or one economy is facing slowdown, there will always be another that will have that kind of the strength that we can invest in. But now it's happening all over the world. Inflation.
I don't think everything's correlated now. There's no such thing as non-correlated risk, isn't it?
Because of globalization, because of the supply chain that is interlinked, right? So how do we build our strength in knowing fully well that this is already happening? It will affect all of us. Whatever that's happening globally. Climate change will affect all of us, right? No matter how small you contribute to the green emission, to the GHG emission, right? Greenhouse emission. No matter how small you contribute, it will affect you if you're not.
There's some very pessimistic outlooks out there about the global economy, right? Stagflation, nothing happening for the next 10 years, high interest rates, high prices, low returns on equities. Do you subscribe to that? You think this is the doom and gloom outlook?
Yeah, stagflation is not something that has not happened before. It had happened before. It may take some years for us to come out of it, but if it does happen, right? It may take us some years to come out of it. But look at where we are right now, And so the world will continue to grow, right? So we are looking at it quite seriously right now, right? I mean, where do you find growth when the world is moderating? At the same time, inflation is rising. It will stay elevated for a prolonged period of time. And our return is actually benchmarked to inflation, right? So where do you find the growth? So that requires specific skill sets. So we have the brains within KWAP to look at this, to continue for us to provide the returns, expected returns that is appropriate for our pensioners. I think I'm an eternal optimist.
Right. Yeah.
I think someone asked that question, will the markets recover? I think it will be the end of the world if the markets don't recover. At some point of time, markets will recover. It's just a matter of when will the market recover? Will the policy adjustments that are taking place right now will shorten or prolong that recovery, right? So regardless of that, because we are not in control of those factors, right? It's up to the central banks all over the world. So what we can do is actually analyze data points that we have and make sure that we are ready, to capitalize on whatever opportunities there are out there when it does happen, when the market recovers.
Okay, good. There's a question here from Jamalia Wang. She wants to know, will the government ever stop giving pensions?
I think
reviewed or called off for new recruits?
I'm not in the government, so
answer the question.
Yeah.
Interesting question though.
Managing a pension fund. So
interesting question though, whether all the new people who join the civil service will not have guaranteed DB pensions. Well, we'll see. Okay, the question here from Haley on your foreign investment. It says 30% by 2025. Is that right?
Yes.
One's got 30% in 2025. And what about currencies? How do you see currency risk at the moment?
Yes, currency is not an asset class for KWAP. When we look at our investments, we look at specific asset classes, which does not look at currency. So we look at the investments, each investment on its own, right? Real return from that perspective, because for us, currency would come into play whenever there are we exit or we sell, we invest and all that. That's when it comes into play. But we look at it as a total package, so to speak. So yes, we do have the intention to basically improve our exposure internationally, and that's mainly because of diversification and also in our journey to seek for growth, globally, not specific to any countries, but globally. But having said that, of course, we're quite mindful, of course, as you know, Banegara, I think, monitors the currency movement and as well as the exchange, foreign currency exchange and all that, closely. So,
yeah. Of course. Yeah, I mean, globally, I mean, the Chinese market is taking a real beating. So whether it's time to look at China, I guess is one. I'm sure you're looking at China. The question is when you decide to go in.
I think again, we never look at specific countries. We are invested in more than 40 countries currently. So China is one of the many countries that we have exposure, that we are invested in as a global portfolio. So for public equity, for example, Dr. Sharon, we are depending on our index, so the index that we have, for example, will also include the risk budget in the form of tracking error for that particular index. So we have to look at it as the overall. If there are opportunities that offer us greater return, by all means, we will go in.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, overweight, underweight. Another question from Hilly. Are there particular sectors you're looking at when it comes to either private or public equities?
For us, if you look at what is needed out there, I think there are a few sectors that, particularly for domestic market, what we like, for example, anything to do with this will be kind of impact investing kind of approach as well, i.e., for example, from food security perspective, we are very interested in the area. For example, RE, renewable energy, if it provides that energy security for us, we'll be very interested in the area. And the third one, the one that we are very interested in, is retirement services related type of investments. So for example, right now, if you look at Malaysia, for example, I think there's still a lot of things that we can do. For example, retirement schemes or retirement home schemes that we have is quite sporadic rather than wholesome kind of approach. It's not something that is scalable just yet. So that would be one other area that we are very interested in.
No, I mean, it's benched. I know. Yeah, I mean, we have an aging population, and I don't know how we're going to come to grips with that as a country.
But to answer directly that question, actually, I think they're referring perhaps to our KLCI, for example. I think if you look at our banking system, our banks, for example, provide returns of dividends of 6-7%, right? That is really, really good. It's stupendous, right? I think, and it's strong. If you look at the balance sheet of the asset quality of the banks, also strong. I think our banking system had taken the Asian financial crisis as an opportunity to become better and stronger. So the backbone of the economy for Malaysia, which is the banking system, is healthy. So therefore, I think, for me, it's just basically for us to sit through this, challenging situation right now, and I think we will be better going forward. It will provide that kind of confidence to the investment community.
So are you saying you think the banks in Malaysia are stable, or are you saying that you want to increase your exposure to FIs in or both?
Or perhaps both. I mean, it depends. I think we have to look at each investment opportunity. I think for banks, where can we find 7% kind of return, right? Per annum nowadays. It's more like negative return, perhaps, in some cases, right? With the market being very volatile. So for me, if any companies can offer me 7%, because that is even higher than what we are targeting. We are looking at
Yeah, that's right.
6% per annum, right? So if it's 7% per annum, I think it goes without saying that is an opportunity that we'll be looking closely to be invested in.
Well, we must come and talk to you about some banking stocks as well. Thank you. Nik, it's been great talking to you. It's an hour has just flown by. I understand it's your birthday tomorrow, so happy birthday.
Oh, no.
Happy birthday. Happy
you.
birthday.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday.
You remind me
Thank you.
of my age, Dato.
No, you're much younger than I am, so that's all right. We're all young. The aging population is somebody else, it's not us. But thank you so much for being on Conversations. I enjoyed it tremendously. I hope that you did, and I know the audience did as well. So thank you again. Thank you. Take care. Assalamualaikum.
Salam.
Let me just log off now. All right.